Hi, this is Wes from PC Gamer, and today we're doing a full performance analysis of Dawn of War 3, which is out on April 27th. Relic ran an open beta before launch, but we're using a slightly different pre-release build for our testing. This is important because both the drivers and the game engine will likely improve over the coming weeks, but we're looking at how it runs right now. The main settings that will affect performance of Dawn of War 3 are image quality, texture detail, anti-aliasing, and physics, alongside of course resolution. The demands of the game scale quite a bit with these settings, especially anti-aliasing, which is really brutal on medium and high. For testing performance, Dawn of War 3 includes a built-in benchmark. That's great news, as it means you can use the same tests that we're running. There is a catch though. The results collected by the benchmark include extra frames rendered before and after the gameplay, and that can radically skew the results. To get around this, we've captured the 30 seconds of simulated gameplay using fraps, and that's the data that we're going to be looking at. Current graphics cards should handle 1080p medium settings, while mainstream $200 cards should be good for 1080p and max settings. Higher end graphics cards like the GTX 1070 and above are capable of 1440p and 60 plus FPS. Okay, let's jump into our testing of some entry-level graphics cards. At the bottom, you can see the real-time frame rate graphs comparing these four budget to mainstream GPUs. One thing you'll notice is that the faster cards show periodic dips into the low 30 frames per second range. This has been fixed in the public release of Dawn of War 3 and is no longer a problem. But in the pre-release code that we use for testing, the higher your frame rate gets, the more likely these stutters are to appear. Other than the RX 460 cards, everything here manages to hit an average 60 FPS at 1080p medium, though the minimums can and do fall well below that mark. Moving to 1080p Ultra settings with an anti-aliasing on low, performance is still good for mainstream cards. The 1060 3GB and RX 470 4GB both clear 60 FPS, and only cards like the 1050 and RX 460 cards or lower have problems. Faster cards like the 1070 and 1080 start pushing above 120 FPS, which is simply the limit of our overlay, not an FPS cap in the game. Again, note the stutters that seem to occur more frequently on the faster GPUs. With the higher quality textures in play, 2GB cards may run out of VRAM. AMD's RX 460 2GB in particular has a bad showing here, though future drivers will likely improve the situation. At 1440p, we're focusing on high-end cards, and the 1070 and above from Nvidia all continue to do well. AMD's previous generation R9 Fury X is due for retirement now. Until AMD launches its RX Vega cards, Nvidia is basically unchallenged at the top of the performance stack. Everything below the GTX 1070 unfortunately fails to hit 60 FPS, though opting for high settings instead of maximum may be enough to get you there. If you're gunning for 4K, be prepared to bring the heavy weapons to bear. The GTX 1080 Ti does manage to hit 60 FPS average, but as you can see in the frame rate overlay, that means some areas will run at close to 70 FPS while others run closer to 50 FPS. This is where technologies like G-Sync and FreeSync are really useful, as they link your display's refresh rate to your frame rate, avoiding tearing while still delivering smooth gameplay. And with frame rates sitting at relatively stable values, you can also see that the massive dips we encountered at lower resolutions are gone. We did some limited testing with GTX 1080 cards and SLI with Nvidia's latest 381.89 drivers. The best scaling we saw was at 4K, where the second GPU improved frame rates by a mere 28%. Relic's Company of Heroes 2 never got functional SLI or crossfire support, so at least SLI is doing something here, but at lower resolutions it's still going to do very little. MSI also provided 3 of their gaming notebooks for testing, which use the mobile variants of the GTX 1080, 1070, and 1060. Both GT series notebooks also include G-Sync displays with a 120Hz panel on the GT73 VR, so all the added performance potential doesn't go to waste. The GS63 VR, meanwhile, has a 4K IPS display, which looks beautiful, but unfortunately proves a bit much for its slower GPU when it comes to gaming. The mobile CPUs are somewhat slower than the overclocked i7 7700K, which limits performance a bit, particularly with the GT73 VR. At higher resolutions where the GPU is the only real bottleneck though, the GT73 VR actually matches the performance of the desktop GTX 1080 system. As we wrap things up, I want to cover a few oddities we found in our testing. You may have noticed we tested with anti-aliasing set to low rather than medium or high. The reason's pretty simple. The low AA setting corresponds to FXAA, a post-processing filter that barely impacts performance, but doesn't really do a great job of eliminating jaggies. Medium and high, on the other hand, use super sample AA, basically rendering at a higher resolution and then scaling down to your display resolution. The net result is that performance scales just like it would with a higher resolution, and that gets incredibly demanding, especially at 1440 and 4K. There's another quirk we hope is fixed in a patch. Dawn of War 3 will run at your desktop resolution even though there's a resolution option in the menu. The game totally ignores this. You can use the resolution scaling feature to target a lower or higher rendering resolution in-game, but if you're on a 4K display as an example, the higher native resolution of that display will use more graphics memory even if you scale down the resolution in-game, so frame rates on lower end cards still won't really be playable. One final note, the built-in benchmark runs in a letterbox mode while the game proper does not. The results from the benchmark may vary slightly from the game, but gameplay performance itself can vary widely depending on what's happening on screen anyway. The good news is the benchmark does throw a lot of units onto the map, so it should come close to representing a worst case scenario. Thanks to MSI for providing the notebooks, graphics cards, and system we use for testing. Our test bench is MSI's new Aegis Ti3, which has a 4.8 GHz i7 7700K processor, 64 gigs of RAM, and a terabyte of solid-state storage. We have a more detailed write-up of our testing, including Ryzen CPU performance, over at PCGamer.com, so be sure to check it out for the full analysis.